There's a moment that arrives quietly at the beginning of the year. Not at midnight, not when the countdown ends, but a few days later, when the noise is thinned out, and the world seems to lean forward with expectations it hasn't asked your permission to place on you. It's the moment when everyone else appears to be moving, announcing, planning, declaring, and you feel still. Not empty, just still. And that stillness can feel strangely isolating, especially when a new year is supposed to mean renewal, momentum, proof of life. Some people meet January with lists and resolutions and visible confidence. Others meet it quietly, with fewer words, fewer announcements, sometimes fewer gatherings. That quiet response is often misunderstood. It's seen as hesitation, or sadness, or failure to start fresh the right way. But the truth is more layered than that. There are people who don't rush into the new year because they're listening first. Not for instructions, for alignment. They don't feel the need to declare who they're becoming before they've felt it settle into their body. They don't confuse movement with meaning. They don't mistake visibility for presence. And in a culture that celebrates display, this restraint can look like absence. But absence is not the same as emptiness. There's a difference between loneliness and solitude. Even though they often wear the same coat at the door, the loneliness at the start of a new year isn't always about being alone. Sometimes it's about not recognizing yourself in the performance that surrounds you. When everyone is broadcasting certainty and you're living inside questions. When joy is expected to be loud and yours is quieter, slower, more internal. So you stay back, not because you're afraid, but because you're unwilling to perform a version of yourself that hasn't arrived yet. That restraint is often mistaken for insecurity. But insecurity is loud in a different way. It reaches outward, asking to be mirrored, affirmed, validated immediately. What you're feeling is not that. What you're feeling is privacy. Privacy of becoming, privacy of thought, privacy of emotion that hasn't asked to be explained yet. There's a psychological layer here that rarely gets named. Some people experience identity as something they announce. Others experience it as something they inhabit. Neither is better, neither is worse. But when identity is something you live from the inside, you don't rush to decorate it for an audience. You wait until it feels solid enough to hold your weight. And that waiting can feel lonely when the calendar insists you should already be somewhere else. Another layer sits underneath perception. Not how you see yourself, but how you know you're being seen. The start of a new year carries a strange spotlight. People notice who is present, who is active, who is visibly doing well. And when you choose not to step into that light, assumptions form. That you're falling behind, that you're unmotivated, that something must be wrong. But opting out of visibility isn't the same as disappearing. There is a form of self-respect that refuses to turn inner life into spectacle. That doesn't confuse being witnessed with being known. Some people need to be seen to feel real. Others need to feel real before they're willing to be seen. That difference is not a flaw. It's a boundary. And boundaries often look like distance to those who don't need them. Then there's vulnerability. The new year asks for vulnerability disguised as confidence. Here's what I'm changing. Here's who I'll be. Here's what I promise. But real vulnerability doesn't always speak in promises. Sometimes it's quiet because it doesn't want to lie. Because it knows how fragile intention can be before it roots itself in action. Because it understands that naming something too early can collapse it under expectation. So instead of speaking, you observe. You watch the year breathe for a moment. You let your nervous system catch up. You let yourself feel what actually needs attention, rather than what would look impressive to address. That gentleness can feel like loneliness when you're surrounded by urgency. But urgency isn't depth. There's also autonomy here. A refusal, often unconscious, to let the calendar dictate your emotional tempo. January comes with an unspoken command. Be new now. But some people don't work that way. Some people change slowly, almost invisibly, until one day the shift is undeniable. They don't align themselves with dates. They align themselves with readiness. And readiness doesn't announce itself on January 1st. It arrives quietly when no one is watching, and often long after the celebration has moved on. The loneliness that accompanies this kind of autonomy isn't a sign that something is wrong. It's the cost of not outsourcing your sense of self to the room, of not needing the collective mood to tell you how to feel. That doesn't make you immune to connection. It just means you're selective about where you place your emotional weight. And yes, there are moments when that selectivity aches. When you wish someone would notice the way you're holding yourself together quietly. When you wish the world made more room for people who don't arrive with fireworks. But that ache doesn't invalidate the choice. It simply reminds you that depth is not always crowded. As the year begins, it's okay if your presence feels subtle. It's okay if you're not loud about hope. If your joy is still forming senses. If your direction feels more like a feeling than a plan. You are not behind for moving inward before moving forward. You are not broken for feeling lonely in a season that insists on togetherness. And you are not weak for choosing authenticity over performance, even when it costs you visibility. Some people bloom in public. Others root themselves in silence first. Both are human. The world may not pause to notice the quiet ones at the start of the year, but the quiet ones are often the ones who notice the world most clearly. And that awareness, steady, unannounced, self-held, is its own form of belonging.